We're doing it.
We're doing it.
I think we got enough seats today. Awesome. All right, welcome everyone to 1 Million Cups. I'll be the MC today. My name's Jacob Hacker. I run a company called Trail Fit Fitness. I am an obstacle course racing coach, parkour, ninja warrior, personal trainer. Just trying to make you better. So, if you ever need anything, let me know. Let's see, 1 Million Cups. It is an entrepreneur group here to network as well as support local entrepreneurs who are anywhere between startup all the way to 5 years inside of their company. So we love to hear that startup and as well as a progression so you can reapply and present a year later, I'm told, right? 1 year later? 1 year later afterwards and give us an update about your business. So please do so as well. We got our coffee roaster, which is Kirsty Logan's with Sleepy Turtle Coffee Company, and she's going to come up and say a word about her business.
Hey guys, my name is Kirsty. I'm the owner of the Sleepy Turtle Coffee Co. here in Colorado Springs. I'm a mobile coffee shop. I do wholesale, private labeling, and all sorts of events. As the holidays are coming, if you have any special events that you want to do or any customer relations things involving cute little gift sets, I have some cool stuff. So talk to me after.
And next up on the list, we have our coffee sponsor. That's going to be Colorado Enterprise Fund. Is anybody there here today? Awesome. Cool, cool.
I brought my favorite 1 Million Cups cup, but I have 3 Colorado Enterprise Fund coffee mugs if any of you want to show that you're our friends. And they're the perfect size. So just come see me and I'll give you one.
Throw them to the audience, huh? I don't know if we're awake, you know.
I didn't even think of that.
All right, and then we also have another coffee sponsor, which is the SBDC, as well as the Better Business Bureau, and I think I saw Matt walk in. So yeah, he's got 30 seconds. Coffee cup sponsor. Apologies.
We'll let it slide this one time. Hi guys, my name is Matt Thompson. I'm with the Better Business Bureau of Southern Colorado. I can answer any questions that you guys might have about what it takes to get accredited and then how to maximize the benefits that we offer once you are. We just released they filled my calendar up the other day with all the events we're doing next year, so I will have a lot of news coming up for you guys probably next week. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, and then a reminder, we'll have community announcements in between presenters. So those are about 20 seconds long, more about what's going on in the community, not who you are. Just a reminder, those will be coming up. Please silence all cell phones, turn off Siri, turn off alarms, anything with your cell phone. And then also check in on the 1 Million Cups app. Yeah, that's something new we're trying to do. And then with that, we'll bring up our first presenter, David Stonger. Did I say that right? David Stonger with mdavid Consulting. So give it up.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is David Stonger, and I am a consulting psychologist. So, okay, let's get to it. I started my journey as a clinical psychologist. I was doing assessments, I was doing therapy, I was working in clinics. Psychology was just a subject that I always found fascinating. I started in undergrad and I just kept going. I got my master's and I ended up getting my PhD. It was one of those things where I thought, this feels great, let's just see where this journey takes me. Now, one of the parts of getting a clinical PhD is you have to do a 1-year internship. So I wasn't exactly sure where I wanted to go. Most of the places were hospitals. I had a professor that said, hey, have you thought about the military? No, I hadn't thought about that at all. So I took his advice and I went ahead and I applied, and I'm glad I did. So I was accepted into a military internship in San Antonio, and I served as a medical officer in the Air Force for 4 years. After that, intermittently, I also served as a contractor and as a government worker, a GS worker. In fact, that was the job that brought me out here to Colorado Springs after I finished my active duty time, was working at one of the many bases here in town. In fact, I was working at one of the bases here when COVID hit, and that was really a game changer for so many reasons, as all of us are aware. Referrals in the clinic more than doubled, and within 6 months, I was the only provider in the clinic. And so for me, I was starting to get burnt out. I was starting to get overwhelmed, and I needed a change. I needed a new direction. I needed to do something different. So I transitioned to consulting psychology. A lot of times when I tell people, hey, I'm a consulting psychologist, they think, that's great. What is that? So, in short, consulting psychology improves organizations with knowledge of human behavior. Basically, we fix human problems in business, but I will get to that much later. So first, let me ask you a question. By a show of hands, how many people here have had a bad boss? Yeah, exactly. Okay, I've had a couple of them myself. In fact, one of them was so bad, we even made t-shirts with the boss's quotes on it. I kid you not. I still have the t-shirt. So I haven't met any adult that has had only good managers. Usually everybody has at least one story of the horrible boss, of the bad manager, of somebody that they think, oh God, I never want to work for that person again. So that's part of why I wanted to do part of what I do, and one of the aspects of what I do is coaching. So for me, coaching is about having a one-to-one connection. It's not therapy, and I know what that looks like, and it is different. There's a lot of overlap because it involves connecting, and that's really what's important to me, is making that one-to-one interpersonal connection. It's something that I learned in school, it's something that I was always naturally good at, and it's something that coaching helps me to do professionally. Okay, let me ask you a second question. How many of you have been part of a group project? Yeah, okay. Now, how many of you felt dread at the word group project? Yeah, me too. Me too, right? That idea of, oh gosh, I'm going to have to go do this thing, and there's a lot riding on it, and there's a lot of people. Oh, this feels terrible, right? So working with teams is another one of those things that I love doing. Now, my most important team building exercise came when I was in officer training at the Air Force. Now, my plan when I was in officer training was to just fly under the radar. Just get there, be quiet, follow all the rules, don't stick your head up. That didn't really work out for me, and about 4 days in, my plan crashed and burned. Now, the flight of 15 trainees I was a part of was constantly fighting. All the time. We were at each other's throats. We were nitpicking. We were yelling. We could not get along to save our lives. So during one of these random acts of arguing that we had at various times, I decided, you know what? I'm going to take a little bit of the psych training that I have, and we'll just make some compromises. We'll just get through this thing. Yeah. So my reward was, for any of the veterans in the audience, more work. So I was elected flight officer in charge of those 15 people. And we were trying to make to get placement, to win, to be seen as competent. Well, for the next 5 weeks, I had to lead those fellow trainees and mold them into an efficient, effective flight. We lost every head-to-head competition that we were in, and we were almost last in every documented category. But we all graduated, so that was the important thing. We all moved on. Okay, my final question for the audience. How many of you have ever had a job that you dreaded? Not just a boss, but a place, right? You had a mantra, you had to do the deep breathing. Maybe you were out in the parking lot thinking, oh, I can do this, right? Okay, that place was probably toxic, probably had a toxic culture, and you knew it, but you were probably trapped because you felt obligated to go there and get that paycheck. Toxic cultures are one of those things that I love helping people with, helping businesses with, so that they don't have to have people out in the parking lot thinking, oh God, how am I going to get through today? So between military jobs, I went back to school for more education. Now, this sounded like a good idea at the time, but what I majored in was anthropology. So I started in psychology and then went back for more people stuff with anthropology. But the interesting thing about anthropology, and it's a social science just like psychology, it's just different dialects. Same language, different dialects. But the focus on archaeology and culture really taught me an extra dimension that I can bring to my business so I could really fully understand, oh, hey, here's how this culture works. Not just culture in general, but your culture here. Thank you so much.
Now we have 20-minute Q&A. You can get into all the rest of the stuff.
What were you going to say next?
I think I was going to give my conclusion. I've tried to take my varied experiences in education, mold it into a business that really helps people at different levels, individual, group, and team. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for coming today. Having a staff, just recently had a staff for about 4 years of about 12 people to 15 people. There's always dynamics going on. And until we settled on a really good staff in the last 6 months of our business, we had a lot of turnover. And my question to you, do you have, does your business include like triage and special, hey, we had an employee leave, very disgruntled about things. We got to mend the group, come back to a team. Do you help with those kind of things? And kind of like what's your philosophy and approach on that?
Yeah, that's one of my specialties. Team building, team correction, things like that. I mean, almost every job that you go to that's bigger than just a handful of people is going to have dynamics, right? You know, and even with a solopreneur, you've got your own stuff on board that you have to kind of think through and deal with. So yeah, I use something called the Rocket Model, which is it's a research model by former clinical psychologists and industrial organizational psychologists. So it's well researched. It's got good validity, good reliability, which as a data geek, those are really important to me to have those. But it really looks at several different areas of how teams are built. It looks at context. It looks at courage. It looks at communication. It looks at all these different facets of how our team is functioning, gets a baseline for it, and then tries to understand, okay, where are the shortcomings? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And then how can we build you to be the best for your business? And every business is going to have its own teams and its own unique needs. So what's going to work for one is obviously not going to work for the next. So being able to go into one place and say, okay, you know, what's your culture here, right? What are you shooting for? And then how are the teams working with that? Right? Are they working against the grain? Are they working with it? You know, what does that look like? So one of the first things that I always do is just get data, get information, right? Because if I'm just going to go in there with a one size fits all, it's not going to work.
Do you do anything for pre-employment where you have people maybe see if they fit into the culture? That's probably the hardest thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So working with hiring and retention, those are two of the big things that I absolutely work with. A lot of times personality assessment can be beneficial with that, with a caveat. There's a lot of assessments out there. I'm sure everybody in here has probably done a few, right, at their workplace, or whether it's the Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, the color, the DISC. There's so many out there, right? But finding one that is actually effective, empirically supported, and fulfills the legal requirement of has better than 70% reliability and validity to make sure that you're not just throwing something at the wall and then telling someone you can't work here because, you know, your aura is fuchsia. Right? So yeah, finding a good fit, understanding the culture, and then saying, hey, this is a profile for who you might want to find and who might be a good fit here based upon what your working culture is. Now, that's not something that I would say as a complete only find this type of person, right? Human beings are obviously going to be varied, and we're going to act differently at work than how we necessarily do at home, blah, blah, blah. So yes, to answer your question, I do that, and I think it is a very beneficial way of helping to find the right people for business.
You mentioned anthropology. So give us some of the distinctions of what you learned between psychology and anthropology.
Oh boy. How much time do I have again? I'm sorry.
15 minutes.
Woo, yeah, talking about, thank you for bringing that up. Ooh, all right. So they're both people-centric, but I think the way that they approach the outputs of behavior, of group thought, of group action is very different. Anthropology has a strong, especially cultural anthropology, has a strong track record of observation and trying to understand. There's a lot of different sort of theoretical approaches. With psychology, especially with more of the applied psychologies, clinical, counseling, developmental to some extent, it's about figuring out what works. And I think with anthropology, because there is such an academic tilt to it, it can seem more hands-off at times. At least in my world, I certainly know that there are anthropologists that are out there doing really great research and working within communities to really benefit them using the research that they have. But I think the individual versus group level is something that is very, very different, especially when you're talking about the applied stuff. Social psychology is probably the closest and has the most overlap with cultural anthropology of the two, because it's all about group behavior. But I think the gathering of data, qualitative versus quantitative, is another very important distinction. Anthropology is very qualitative, and psychology almost always has a quantitative bent to it. So a mixed methods approach, which both social sciences use, I think could be very, very beneficial. But for me, it was interesting to really see that additional perspective of, hey, we don't need to go into a statistics program and analyze, what your reliability is on the data that you've gathered to be able to understand something, right? Which in psychology is, where's your data, what's your numbers? So, did I answer that? Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
So you said that you work with teams and organizations and individuals. How do you work with individuals / what's your favorite kind of client to work with?
So my niche specialty that I'm really trying to grow and trying to focus on is tech firms, engineers, aerospace, folks that are sort of very technically minded. And I find that first of all, I'm married to an engineer, so I should just kind of put that out there. So I've lived with it for quite some time. For me, being able to help those individuals that are very, very, very bright, very focused, very technically minded, and they don't quite have the interpersonal stuff. Heresy, I know. But those areas where the interpersonal is lacking, I love to be able to come in and help and say, hey, if you try this and you do this, you're going to find the results to be much better. And so sort of speaking that techno speak, engineerese, whatever you want to call it, is something that I've naturally kind of fallen into. And so I love helping those kinds of folks. At the individual level, coaching is usually about finding goals and making sure that you're achieving and accomplishing what you want to, making sure that you're on track, that it's driven, that there's accountability for it, and that it is very, very focused, very sort of solution-based. At the team level, I already kind of mentioned the rocket model, but getting teams to work together a lot of times is about understanding and managing interaction effects. What one person has over here and what one person has over here, they're each their own individual stuff. You might be able to manage this, you might be able to manage this. But this times this produces its own thing, right? And then with a team, it's this times this times this times this, plus the entity of the team itself. And so if you kind of do a color diagram of it, it's a rainbow. So understanding how all that stuff works together and trying to sort of correct some of those lines and subtly shift some of those behaviors so that the end goal, that everybody's on the same page. As I had a colleague say, everybody's on the same bus facing the same way and they're driving in the direction they want to go.
Hi, I was wondering, so do you work primarily with HR? It sounds like you impact, influence, quote unquote, performance reviews type of quantities. How do you work with the organization, and how do you know when you've succeeded with your tech employee base?
Yeah. So I try not to work with HR. And the reason for that is HR has its own often underfunded, undervalued niche. I really sympathize with a lot of HR folks because they have to wear 17 different hats and they have funding for like 2 of them. And then when they actually, produce something that's good, et cetera, the number of people that listen to them is relatively small. It kind of goes with the territory. And so usually I get one of 2 reactions when I encounter HR folks. One is, we already do everything you do, we don't need you, go away. And the other one is, oh, thank God, where have you been? And so kind of, I don't necessarily like to go into that sort of uncertain environment. And often, because of, especially with larger organizations, the politics that exist between HR, between the C-suite, et cetera, and sort of how everything goes, I find it much, much easier to go directly to the top. So I love working with C-suite folks, COOs, CEOs, sometimes CFOs, but a lot of the folks that can say, listen, we need to get this thing done. You've convinced me, you've shown me the data. When do we start? Here's the check. Let me write it for you. Those are the things that I appreciate because it removes a lot of the filters that I think HR can sometimes unwillingly apply just because of part of who they are and what their multiple hats and multiple roles are. So yeah, I sympathize with HR, but I try not to work with them just because it tends to make both of our jobs more complicated. To your point about performance reviews, that's one of those things that I try and avoid. Now, the reason for that is because I think a performance review, and frankly, this is one of those hills that I would die on, I think performance reviews are stupid. I don't think they're beneficial. I don't think they help change anything. You're not directly targeting behaviors, and even if you are, it's so wishy-washy as to be essentially, non-existent. Why? What? But that's an aside. So I try and avoid that kind of thing because if you're talking about changing behavior, you're talking about end results, you're talking about here's where you want to go. How do we get there? Okay, here are the first three steps that we're going to take because you need to change X, Y, and Z. Okay, so understanding sort of who the players are, who's involved, who's your boss, who wants this, and frankly, if there's a boss that's like, I want them to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, why? Well, because that's how I like it. Okay, is that going to help the overall dynamic? Is that going to help the person? Are you trying to just shoehorn them into something? So I try and avoid HR for those reasons. Sorry, that's a bit of a long-winded answer.
Hi, thanks for coming. You're definitely well-versed in everything that you're sharing with us. So I think I have a 2-part question. One would be, how do you find your clients? Like, do you have like a vetting process, so to speak, that you decide if you're a good fit for them and they're a good fit for you type of a deal? And then my second part would be, what about, I can think of some CEOs that I know that may not be the ones seeking advice on how to grow their team, right? They may be like, this is my way or the highway type of deal. How do you get into those types of environments?
Okay, so the first question, how do I find my clients? So right now it's mostly been through networking and referrals, and I'm actively working to change that. I'm trying to broaden my footprint, trying to change my networking so that I do reach more folks. One of the challenges that I've encountered, particularly with those engineering, aerospace, tech folks, is they tend not to be the most gregarious, and so they tend not to go to a lot of these networking events and be sort of insular. And so me getting my foot in the door has definitely been a challenge. And so that's actually one of the asks that I have for the audience today, is I would love to know who you know. I would love to sort of think about connecting and sort of, if you know of any better ways to get to those folks, to talk to those folks, I would love to hear them. So that's part one. Part two, those sort of perhaps stubborn CEOs, shall we say. How do I reach them? It really depends on if they're willing to be reached. So one of my favorite corny jokes when I was a therapist was, how many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb has to want to change. So I think that still sort of holds true. If there are dynamics where that person, say a founder effect, and they're really focused in, and they're sort of embedded in where they want to be and where they think they should be. Should is a really hard thing to change, and so you're going to need some significant buy-in from that individual if you want to work on individual level change. Now, if they see the writing on the wall and they're like, okay, the company's got to change, and maybe I'm standing in the way, let's talk about how you can work with my teams or some other folks. And I would say that's one way to kind of get in and start the change process. And then if that person, once you get an opening, you can sort of massage that and grow that and move towards an eventual resolution.
Do you do any sort of like auditing for companies? Like, would you go in and be like, let's check all these, key elements and see how we're doing, and based on that, I think you could use some help in this area. Have you tried anything like that?
No, I have not at this time done any kind of auditing, and part of the reason for that is from my psycholegal training, that's a little bit more fraught in terms of opening yourself up. So I try and avoid that. I think if there was a company that specifically said, hey, we would like you to take a 30,000-foot look through the lens of culture, I would do that. But I probably would not go in specifically and say I'm going to audit.
So what is your overall vision on how you and your business would impact and influence businesses and how our interpersonal interactions are evolved?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've really been thinking about and really has had a significant impact on me since COVID is moving away from the 40-hour work week, moving towards hybrid and remote, and moving away from these frankly outdated Industrial Revolution era ideas about what work is. I think statistics have shown, and I think what the lockdowns and work from home has shown from COVID is that productivity can be just about anywhere. If you have, especially for white collar folks, I mean, if you actually are in industry and you do have to be in place and it is a face-to-face, that's kind of different. But if we're talking about producing ideas and working from kind of that white collar perspective, that production can be anywhere. And so for me, sort of preaching that gospel of you don't have to be at the office, you don't have to work 40 hours a week. Some people may want to work 60 and they love it, and others want to work 20. And if you can set the appropriate goals and you can have the things and have the right fit for that individual doing what they're talented at, you can produce magnificent things and everybody wins. And so I think having that sort of zero-sum, 40 hours a week, butts and chairs kind of approach, I think is wildly outdated, and frankly, it's holding people back.
Couple minutes left. Maybe the time for the super special question, if someone's got one.
I think you touched on this a little bit already, but what can we as a Colorado Springs business community do to help you?
Yeah, a lot of what I'm really looking for is networking connection. I'm really trying to find ways to meet the right people. I mean, it is so important, especially in my line of work, where you can be like, oh, you're HR, or why don't you go talk to this guy? And then having to kind of work my way up through the food chain to get to the point where what I'm putting down is picked up by the right person. So for those connections, for those ideas, for those, hey, you should talk to such and such, et cetera, et cetera. Hey, I know a guy with this company. They're up and coming. They've got 23 workers and they could really use your help. Those kinds of things. That's really what I'm looking for from the community, is to be a larger part of the community and have kind of greater connectivity.
Thank you very much. We're going to grab your cup real quick. All right, there it is. All right, and the official 1 million cup, you can unpackage it yourself.
Thank you
Look
so
at
much. Thank you all so much. I appreciate the questions.
that. All right.